Alright, so if you happen to download the Gimp editor, then this is how you can digitize your geofilter using this program. First, you can go to the menu bar and select File, and then New. And here you will want to set the width to 1080 by 1920 pixels as the height, and make sure it's in portrait mode, and then click on the advanced options. Make sure that the X and Y resolution is 300 and this is set to pixels per inch. The color space should be RGB, and make sure to select transparency out of this fill width section and then select OK. And it should create the box that you're going to need to create your geofilter. Next, go back up to File and then select Open, and find the geofilter sketch on your desktop and select Open. Alright, so this should open up your sketch in a new box, and we're going to need to put it in our geofilter box, but first let's go ahead and resize it so we make sure that it fits in there. So what we can do is go to the menu bar and select Image, and then go down to Scale Image. And since our box for the geofilter is 1080 pixels wide, we're just going to go with 1000 pixels, or we can go with 1080 if we'd like, just so it fits within that box. And just make sure that this link is selected so it scales proportionately so it doesn't get distorted. And what you can do is then select Scale, and it will bring it down to that size. And what we'll do is just copy it by going to Edit and then Copy, and then go back to our other artboard and go ahead and go to Edit and then Paste, and this will paste that image in there so we can go ahead and trace it. In the Tools panel to the left, make sure that your Move tool is selected, and then just move that sketch down to where you'd like it before we start sketching it. And then at the other box, you can either close it out or minimize it, and then we'll just focus on this one with our geofilter. Now, since we have our sketch, we want to do the tracing of it on top of it, so we're going to create a new layer in the right side in the Layers panel. So click the new layer icon, and you should be brought with this dialog box saying create a new layer, and you can name that layer. We're going to name it Trace, and then you can go to the width is going to be the same and the height is going to be the same as our original document, so we're going to keep those the same, and then just make sure that the transparency is also selected, and then select OK. And you can see the trace layer is above our image layer, and we could just double click to rename that to image, and we can keep that background layer if we'd like. And what we can do now is select the trace layer, and we could begin tracing our geofilter sketch. Now I'm going to move this down before we begin, just to make sure that it's right in the right place, because similar to Photoshop, you're going to be drawing with paths that aren't actually filled in yet, so you're going to need to make sure that all the paths are in the right area first, and then you're going to fill them in later. So you want to make sure that wherever you're going to be drawing those paths are going to be an area that you want to keep, because it's going to be a little bit more difficult to change it later. Now, if you wanted to decrease the opacity of that image sketch, you can go above, you can click on that layer and then go above it and slide this icon, or click on the down arrow, and it will decrease the opacity so it's not as strong. And then click back on the trace layer, and in this panel you can go up to where it says the paths, which is this icon, and then you can go over to the left side of your screen and select the paths tool, which is similar to the pen tool in Photoshop and Illustrator. Once we have selected the paths tool, we can zoom in on our sketch by going to the zoom feature at the very bottom of the box, and you can click up arrow, and then you could go to whatever percentage you'd like. I'm going to go to 200% and just scroll down to find that first area I want to trace over. Now if you go to create your paths and it's just not allowing you to, you can go over to the left sidebar, just double check that the paths tool is selected, and then go down to the tool options at the very bottom and select the design option. And then you should be able to add your points and create your paths. However, something that is different in GIMP from Photoshop and Illustrator is that there's no really convert tool for the anchor points, so it's best to start out by clicking and dragging to bring out those handles. So what we're going to do is click and drag to create those handles and those points, and we're dragging in the direction we want to go and doing that around every curve where there's the change in direction. And if there's any mistake, you can just undo it by hitting Control or Command Z. Click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. And you'll see that there's also, you'll have to go back, and where there's corners, you'll have to manually adjust the Bezier curves or the handles in order to make it a little bit more like a corner rather than a curve. And then when you complete the shape, you can't just click on it, you have to hold down the Control or the Command key and then click on it, and then that will complete your shape. And then you can go back and change those anchor points handles by just clicking and dragging. Click on those points first and then drag on those handles, and you can even adjust those points as well and then drag those handles out. And remember that it's going to, by default, only change one of those handles. So if you want to keep them the same, you need to hold down the Shift key to keep them parallel with each other. Now with this, we're going to zoom in. And as you can see, this is not going to be a sharp curve, and we can't just click on it like we did in Photoshop and Illustrator to make it into a corner. So we just have to manually adjust that by bringing it in and creating more of a corner. It's the same with the other one. And there we go. We're going to do the same thing with this corner. Just click and drag on that one handle to change it into a corner, and then adjust anything with the Shift key to keep them proportional or parallel with each other. Again, this is very similar to Photoshop, so if you have any questions that I'm not covering in here, just make sure to revisit that lesson, even if you don't have Photoshop, because I covered the pen tool, which is very similar to the path tool in GIMP. Again, as we did in Photoshop, each different shape is going to have to be on a new path. So what we can do is, after we're done doing this, we're going to go over to the Paths panel on the right, click the icon, and then create a new path with the new path icon. Then click OK. And this is for every different shape. Anything that is going to be overlapping is going to have to be on a new path. And I like to keep my letters separate as far as when I'm digitizing them. So if I'm going to keep this part separate, this part of the A separate, and the stem of the A separate, then I'm going to have to create a new path for each one of these. And remember to hold down Command or Control when you want to complete a shape, and click on the first point that you created. I'm going to create a new path, and then draw this part. Alright, so I finished the bowl of the A, so I'm going to create a new path for the stem of the A. And then I'm going to create a new path for the C. Now as you continue to create paths, each new one is going to be hidden. So what you can do is go to the Paths panel if you want to see them, and just toggle the icon on the left, and you can see what paths you've already created and what layer they're on. So this one is if we go back to the first one is the S, so it's on a different layer. Second one is the intro to the A, and then the third one is going to be the bowl of the A. The fourth one is going to be the stem of the A, and then the last one is going to be the C itself. So as you can see, I'm creating new paths for each individual shape, and this is going to help because we want to make sure that there's no gaps in the fill that we're going to do later. So we just have to make sure that anything that's intersecting is a new shape on a different path layer. Alright, so I'm going to finish up the rest of this piece, and then we're going to cover how you can fill your paths in. So once you've finished creating the paths for all the individual shapes in your GeoFilter sketch, you can go ahead and just create a new blank path that doesn't have anything, just so you can deselect the path that you are on, and then go over to the layers panel and then deselect the visibility on our GeoFilter sketch. So now that we've unchecked the visibility for the GeoFilter sketch, we can go back to the paths panel and fill each one of these individual paths with a color so we can turn the whole thing into a solid shape. If you don't happen to see your paths, just be sure to check the icon right next to each path layer, and this will show up with a blue outline. If you are on a path, it will actually be red, and you want to avoid this because you may actually delete this path, so just go and create a new layer and just select that one. So now you can go back and click on each individual layer and fill each one in with a color. So just make sure in the left panel that the foreground color is the color you want to fill the path with. And so I want to create this with white, so mine color is white. So select the path that you want to fill in and double click on it, and it should be selected. And then go over to the left side where the toolbar is and the tool options are. Go down to the bottom and select selection from path, and then go ahead and go to the menu bar, select edit, and then fill with FG color, which is the foreground color. And there you go, it should be white now, or whatever your foreground color is, and then you can go ahead and do that with every path. So we're going to select this next path, go to the tool options, and then select selection from path, go to edit, and then fill with foreground color. And then you continue to do that with all your shapes. Alright, so now all your paths should be filled in with the foreground color and come together to create a complete shape. Now what you can do is go to the layers panel and create a new layer and click OK, and drag this new layer below our trace layer. And this is going to be used if we want to create a stroke or a border around our paths. And what we can do is go back to the paths panel and then select a path, and before we go and create that stroke, we're going to go up to the menu bar and select and then none, so we can deselect anything that we have. And then when we go back to the tool options, what we did before is the selection from path, but instead this time we're going to do the stroke path. But before that, we're going to choose the color, and we're going to change the foreground color to a different color so the border stands out. I'm going to select a green color, and then I'm going to go ahead and select stroke path, and then you want a solid color, and I'm going to select 16 pixels for my line width. You could go down to line style. I like to keep the cap style to round as well as the join style to round, and then you can go ahead and select stroke. If you decide you want to change the size of the stroke or change anything about it, it's best to do it right now before you do it to all the paths, because you're then going to have to delete all those and redo them. So I think I'm going to want to increase the size of this stroke a little bit, so I'm going to undo this by going to edit, and then I could do undo stroke path, and then we're going to go back to stroke path, and then I'm going to change this to, let's just do 20, stroke it, and then we can go move on to the next path and just continue to do that to each path. So that's how you can add a stroke or a border around your paths. However, if you wanted to add a drop shadow, what you can do is just go over to the layers panel and select whichever layer you want to have the drop shadow on. So I'm going to select the green stroke layer just because I want it behind that. So then I'm going to go over to filters and then light and shadow, and then select drop shadow. Again, I like to have my offset of the X and Y axis at 0, and I'll select the blur radius to be 15 and the opacity around 60. I'm going to go ahead and select OK. And as you can see, it created a drop shadow behind our paths. Now if you have your paths selected as being visible, you can go back to the paths panel and just check off the icon so they don't show up, so you can see the finished geofilter. So that's how you can add your freeform shapes using the pen tool. However, if you have more basic geometric shapes in your design, you can go ahead and select either the rectangle tool or the ellipse tool, and these are going to be selection tools. So what you can do is it's going to create a selection, and then you can go ahead and fill that selection in with a color. And you can do that by going to the edit and then fill with foreground color, and it's going to fill that in with your foreground color to create a shape. However, I'm going to undo that. You can do the same thing with the rectangle tool. Just go to fill with foreground color. And you can also add basic text by selecting the text tool in the toolbox, selecting the font and size in the tool options, and then going ahead and clicking to start typing, and then just type in your geofilter's text, and you can select all the different style options in the box by highlighting it and then going ahead and selecting whether you want it to be bold, italic, underlined, etc. However, I'm going to go ahead and delete this text by going over to the layers panel and then just hitting the trash can icon while I'm selected on the text layer. And that's going to get rid of it. And let's just say I want to keep this and export this design. So first we're going to save this file just in case we need to edit it later. So we're just going to save as, and then save to the desktop, and we're just going to name it geofilter, and then select save. Next, to export this as a PNG, you can go to File and then Export As, and then from this drop down menu you can go ahead and first select the desktop, rename your file to a different file, and then go to the drop down menu right here where it says all images, and then you could go down to select a PNG just to make sure it saves as a PNG, and then go ahead and double check that it says .png as well as the file type, and then you could go ahead and select export, and then you can keep all these settings the same and then select export. So that's how you can digitize your geofilter using Gimp. And in the next lesson, we're going to cover how you can attract clients to you for Snapchat geofilters.